So now we're holding here by the last, main opinion that Rabbi Tatz is going to bring down of how to understand Hashem's foreknowledge versus our free will. And this is the understanding of Rabbi Wasserman. Rabbi Wasserman was probably considered to be the main disciple of the Horowitz. The Horowitz was the leader of the generation in his time in the 1800s until 1933. Rabbi Wasserman he lived right until the very beginning of World War II. He was in America. I have a famous story that he was in America raising money for his yeshiva at the outbreak of World War II. And the writing was on the walls already that the Nazi war machine was very violent and they were out to kill the Jewish people. And the Jews of America begged Rabbi Wasserman, please, you're here in America already. Going back will certainly mean your death. Stay here with us. We'll open you up in yeshiva. We'll get you whatever you need, and you'll build Torah in America. And Rabbi Chanan said, my family and my yeshiva are suffering at the hands of the Nazis, and I'm going to stay here and live out my life peacefully and build the Torah of America. He said, I'm getting on the first boat. They need me more than you can imagine. And he took a boat and he went right back to Baranovich, which was in Lita at the time, in Lithuania area, and he ended up going back for those couple of years before the whole city met its ultimate demise, and he went around strengthening the resolve and the emunah and the faith of the Jewish people during that time to make sure that they had the strength to go through what they had to go through. And there's a famous story that when they were going out to their final death, he was as calm and tranquil as could be. And he told all the people that were with him from his town, from his yeshiva, his family, you have nothing to fear. We're going to die right now, which is called Al Pi Kiddush Hashem. We're going to sanctify God's name. And you should know there's a great place that's waiting for all of us in heaven. And don't fear and don't go out of your mind. Just go with your strong faith in God. And that's how they left this world, in peace. So anyway, Rabbi Wasserman was certainly, yes.
He did leave his son Simcha.
Well, Simcha was able to, yes, his son Simcha managed to escape at some point, and he got out of there.
He came with his father, and he stayed here while his father went back.
Is that true? That's how he really? I have to take
stay here and work on getting other people out?
What?
Why not stay here and work on
He felt that his responsibility as a leader of the Jewish people made him obligated to go back and lead his flock.
You're going to let him here?
No, it was. I guess he felt that would be.
Money,
I guess he felt that would be impossible to get everybody out, and he knew that
with his name, he could raise money to get people out.
Could have, but he felt he was more needed there than over here, and he could do more for them being there. So he says like this: if you go back to the words of the Rambam that we described, how the Rambam explains that Hashem knows everything, but it doesn't take away or detract from your free will. And that's been the discussion the entire time. So he says, based on the words of the Rambam, that it means that God's knowledge of what will occur closes off all alternative outcomes. If God knows what's going to happen, so there is nothing else that can happen. And if something else would happen, so then God doesn't know what's going to happen. So if no outcomes are possible other than the ones that actually occur, then there can be no free will. Meaning, if we say that God knows everything and He determines everything, so then whatever it is that you do in your life, whatever decision you make, you're not really making a decision. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took away all the other alternatives, and this is what's going to take place. Meaning, if I can't generate any other result in the world, other than the one single inevitable one, how can my freedom of will ever be expressed? God's determining it's going to be like this. So what am I going to do? There's nothing I can do. He already decided because Hashem knows everything and He decides everything. So if there's no alternatives to choose between, so then how does free will, freedom of choice, how does it operate? And so this is the question that we've been dealing with, and this is the way that Rabbi Elchonon frames it. So he says like this: and that he shows that that alternative outcomes are not necessary for free will to exist. The fact that it's programmed what's going to take place doesn't deny me the fact of having BECHIRA, free will. And he demonstrates that even where a person's actions are forced, that person can remain responsible. How does that work? Because when one is forced to perform an action that he desires to do anyway, the external force does not exonerate him. So meaning, you're stuck, says Rabbi Elchonon. HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided this is what you're going to do. There's no way you're going to get around that. I say you have no free will. Says Rabbi Elchonon, you do have free will. Why? Because as long as the action is unwillingly, the absence of an alternative outcome is irrelevant. Meaning, if I throw my will into the pot over here, and therefore I want to do the action that I am already decreed that I have to do, so then that's my level of BECHIRA, my level of free will. If I go through something with no interest, and I go through something without putting my desire into it, and it's just happening, I'm just going through the motions, so then that would sound like what we said the other day from Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, that's like you're honest, you're under duress, there's nothing that you can do. But once that I choose to put my will into this thing, so then that's my choice, that is where my BECHIRA, my free will lies. And he says, Hashem's knowledge may well constitute a decree with respect to action in the world, meaning God's knowledge will make it that this is what's going to happen. There may be, in fact, no possible alternative outcomes to those that actually occur. You can't change it. That's how it's going to be. God knows what's going to happen, so that is what's going to happen. But as long as there's no decree forcing and shaping human will, then we're responsible. Meaning, Hashem says, this is what you're going to do. Now, what's going to be your connection to the action that you're involved with right now? So it is decreed that, whatever the decree, it's decreed that you are going to end up robbing this person of his livelihood. That's whatever the decree is, whatever there's a punishment on this person, and you're the guy that's going to be the one that's involved in it. But how do you access and how do you connect to that action that you're involved with right now? Are you into it? Are you getting excited? Are you pumped up? Are you trying to come up with ways that you can do it even better and be even more ruthless? If you are, then that's your free will. If you're going through it passively, and it's just that you're going through the motions because God already set up this is how it's going to be, then on that you would not be considered to have free will. As long as the will remains free, even though the actions may be rigidly constrained, that is all that is required for human responsibility. So he's saying it's very similar to Rav Tzadok HaKohen. He's just saying it a little bit more in the I guess we'll call it the Litvischer way instead of the Hasidish way. And that is that Hashem does program the world. Hashem does determine the way that things are going to work. There are things, Hashem knows everything, and therefore there's no way around it. That is what's going to happen. But your investment and your involvement and your ruts and your ultimate will within that is where your free will choices are going to be made. Are you going to invest or not invest? Are you going to be a part of it or not be a part of it? Are you going to be involved and engaged or you're not going to be involved and engaged? That's going to be up to you. And he brings a proof. What's the proof that he wants to bring? He brings a proof from Samson, Shimshon. Right? Shimshon ends up marrying a woman who's from the Philistines. Now, a Jew is not allowed to marry a woman from the Philistines. So, when his parents find out that he's bringing home the Philistine woman, they're not very happy. They're actually very upset with him that he would do such a thing. Okay, answer all the questions. She converted this and that or whatever it is. But they were not excited. This was not a mazel tov in their house. So the Gemara says, the verse says, but there was a divine decree mandating that she would be taken by him. And how do we see? Because the verse says his father and mother did not know that it was from God. Meaning, this, that Shimshon is going to marry this woman from the Plishti people, from the Philistine people, this was not considered to be up for discussion. It wasn't that Samson went around and was making a beauty pageant deciding which girl does he want to marry. It was from God. HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided he has to marry this woman. Now, because there's a whole story that has to take place with Samson and the Jewish people and the Plishtim and everything. So, therefore, even though that Samson, it was decreed in heaven that he's supposed to marry this woman, but how much of his own self was into that thing. So therefore, that's what he seems to be saying. That the reason that Samson's going to be held responsible, not because he had a choice. There was no choice. He's going to marry that woman. But whatever of his own ratzon, whatever his own will ends up being inside of there, that's going to be why it is that he's considered to be using his BECHIRA, his free will.
But how did they know this was a decree from God?
Because they didn't. That's the whole point.
So that's
But-
why everybody's angry.
No, but Samson, no.
How would he know?
Because he had prophetic vision.
Oh.
So he understood.
So he also understood that he was going above and beyond what he was supposed to do.
He understood this is what has to happen, but it would seem to be that the complaint against him is going to be how much of his own self was involved.
Rather than saying,
How much of his own self was involved in that. So now he says, we'll read one more paragraph over here. Now, if alternative outcomes in the world are not necessary for free will and consequent accountability, so when the Egyptians enslaved the Jews and were held accountable despite the events having been prophetically foretold, we can accept that the prophecy may indeed have closed all alternatives. Meaning, as we saw, the Rambam himself deals with this. If God told Avraham that there's going to be a nation that will rise up against you for 400 years, and at the end of the day you're going to go free, but I'm going to punish them for what they did to you. So that prophecy was already in the world. That means there is no alternative. There has to be a nation that will rise up and it will end up making the lives of the Jewish people miserable. So then the Egyptians' deeds may have been the only ones possible. That means that what? There's no escape. Hashem already prophesied. He already said that's what's going to happen. There's no escape from being a nation that's going to end up rising against the Jewish people. However, if they chose their deeds, then that's where the responsibility lay. And that's how we described it before. Did Hashem tell them how cruel to be to the Jews? Did Hashem even say which nation is going to be the one that's going to rise up against the Jewish people? He just says there will be a nation. He didn't say the Egyptians. So therefore, the Egyptians could not, again, nobody can escape that there has to be a nation that will rise up against us. But who's it going to be? So the Egyptians used their free will to become that nation. Once they become the nation that will rise up against us, so we know that they're going to afflict us. So where's the free will now? Well, there's still free will the way that you are going to afflict them. If you're going to become worse than HaKadosh Baruch Hu had, quote unquote, in mind, if you're going to invest your own self and your own hatred and your own disgust and your own anger and your own volatility into destroying the Jewish people, so that already is called BECHIRA, that's called free will. So, again, he's saying, I think it's something that's revolutionary over here. You cannot escape the world that Hashem set up. That's how it's going to be. But you could end up using your free will to maneuver through it in a way that you could be held not accountable for something wrong that you do, and you could be held accountable for the good that you do because you invest yourself into the action. So if I divest, if I divest my own personal will of the actions that I'm going through because God already determined that's what's going to happen, so then I'm not held accountable. If I invest myself into the action, if it's a bad action, and I invest my own will and my own desires and pleasures, everything in there, then you chose to do that.
So the Egyptians were doing God's work by enslaving the Jews. Where they went wrong is they treated cruelly.
Worse than they had to.
Yeah. But otherwise, if they would have treated them, I don't know how you would treat a slave.
If they would have been like just regular oppressors, without investing themselves into it,
they would have been okay.
They would have been okay.
Fine people and godly people.
I don't know, godly people?
Doing God's work.
They would have been doing God's will. Then there's no way to escape it. Now, but still, the question is that it still says over there in the verse that I'm going to end up judging those people as well. So maybe that's what the judgment is, that did you decide to go beyond the call of duty over there, or did you not? Did you
Right.
put in...
What I'm saying is, enslaving the Jews was not something wrong. Treating them cruelly was the wrong thing.
Enslaving the
In the
Jews
eyes of
was,
God.
enslaving the Jews was already prophesied.
Yeah, so they were,
They're doing their job.
yeah.
But I think that we asked a similar question when, in the beginning of time, when the serpent comes and tricks the first man, Adam Arishon, into eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So then, why is he being punished at the end of the day? The serpent, he's just doing his job. His job was to convince man to eat from the tree that he's not supposed to eat from. So now God created the serpent to do that. And he put him in the Garden of Eden to do that. And he bumped them into each other to do that. So then why is he getting punished for doing what he's supposed to do? So the Archaim, one of the commentators, says a similar idea. And that is, who told the serpent to do it in the way in which he did it? Meaning that Adam could have held himself back, but the serpent didn't stop riding against him. And he pushed him into, and he convinced him again and again and again to eat from this tree that he wasn't supposed to eat from. Had he stopped at a certain point, he never would have eaten from the tree. But the serpent didn't let go. He didn't let up.
But did he know that he needed to stop? The reason he was created is to tempt Adam and Eve. Now, he tempted once and then he goes away.
So right. So who says your job is to tempt incessantly? Who says that's what Hashem?
Well, if that's your purpose, and then you can turn this around and say, "Look, I tempted him 2 or 3 times. I went away and got hurt. That's not what you're there for."
Right. Okay.
Back in the game. So you lose either way. I don't know. The snake. I have a problem with that logic, though. I can see the logic with the Egyptian and being cruel, but you were told to do something. Then that's your job to keep doing it.
But remember also, Hashem commanded Adam and Eve, don't eat from the tree.
Well,
which means that right. So that's what it says, because he didn't stop. If they said in the beginning no, and they got involved in some philosophical, theological conversation, and he wasn't convincing them, and he knows that God really doesn't want them to eat from the tree, so they should have just let go. But he didn't stop. He's the cunning snake who just kept going and going and going, and then
I think if he would have stopped and they wouldn't have eaten from the apple, the snake would have been punished. Your job was to keep tempting.
He gets punished anyway. At the end of the day, he gets punished.
He
So
does,
that's the question. Why is he
he
getting punished? What did you do wrong? You did your job. You did too much. You could have stopped.
But maybe that would have been wrong.
Well, we'll never know. Okay. Okay. We'll stop here. There's a little bit more of the Elchonon.
Was it a secret?
So
You shouldn't have told Hava?
it wasn't the same force that would have had to come from God to Chava. So
Well, in the verses themselves, it's the snake talking to Chava, right? In the verses in the Torah, it's the snake talking to Eve, not talking to Adam.
right.
So, and she ends up eating, and then she feeds it to Adam.
Hashem talked to Adam. He didn't talk to
Talk to him about what?
Adam about not eating from the tree,
Right, correct.
not to be.
Right, so he explained to her, we don't eat and we don't even touch. He added, right.
So he got punished twice, the snake.
Why?
He lost his feet,
Yeah,
and then he lost his voice.
he lost his
He don't
voice
talk
then.
today.
Uh-huh. That's a good
I
point.
don't know.
That's a good point. That's interesting.
I'm assuming that they were able to
It's a
communicate.
problem with women. Can't trust them.
Hashem does have a will.